Guess how that document began? Humani Vitae, human life. Sacrosanctum Concilium. Guess how that document began? This sacred council. Lumen Gentium. Guess how that document began? Lumen Gentium, Christ, the light to the nations. Today, Gaudium et Spes. Joy and hope. Joy and hope. It is the longest document of the Second Vatican Council. Its nature and purpose is this: how does the church engage with modern humanity? How does the church engage with the modern world? How does the church roll up her sleeves and engage with the moral order, the social order, the cultural order, the economic order, the political order, the order of the world, the city of man, so to speak? How is she to do that? The church, of course, reminds us that the church has a moral obligation to engage. You know, we've had times in our history when some in the church said the best way to be a Christian is to disengage from the world, to reject the material, to reject the temporal, to go up a mountain and lock yourself in a cave. That's the best way to be a Christian. But that's not what the Lord has revealed. The Lord has said to all of us here, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, you are to be 11. I think it was Hans Urs van Balthasar, a very famous theologian in the life of the church, who said, the Christian is to go into the world and Christify the world. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? To Christify, to make the world like Christ, to make the world like Christ. Now, I know in this world of diversity and plurality, sometimes we can be a little hesitant because we say, well, the world contains persons who don't know Christ. So am I imposing Christ on them? Am I Christifying them? What about the Muslim? What about the Sikh? What about the Hindu? What about the atheist? What about the agnostic? Christify the world. We know, of course, that there is only one God, that there is only one Lord, and that there is only one Savior, the Christ. Now, we believe that. Therefore, we believe that the best thing that can happen anyone is to be given Christ. Not to be proselytized, not to be coerced, not to be forced, not to be argued into the faith, but the best thing we can offer anyone is Christ. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, there is a way to do that, of course. Yes, it'll be difficult for some people to receive, but there's a way of doing it that's not triumphalistic, that's not bombastic, that's not taking out a big stick with Christ written on it and beating everyone else over the head with it. We either believe Christ to be the way, the truth, and the life, and that there is no other, or we don't. With Christ, there is no gray in the sense that you're either for me or you're against me. You either believe in me or you don't. Well, what about everybody else who doesn't know Christ as we know Christ, or believe in him as we believe in him? We leave them to God, to the mercy of God. God desires that all be saved. That's what he desires. So he will provide an opportunity for every single human person to respond to him. Because if that was not the case, God would be unjust, offering salvation opportunities only to a few and not to the all. So is the Muslim offered opportunities to be saved? Well, yes. What do I mean by that? Opportunities to come to know God as he has revealed himself in Christ. Sometimes they're little fragments, sometimes they're little glimmers, but it's important. Gaudium et Spes, as you know, is the longest of the documents. Some people criticize the document because they say, oh, it's too optimistic. Imagine some people in the church saying, Gaudium et Spes is too optimistic. It doesn't take into account that we live in a fallen world. It doesn't, not my opinion, the opinion of some, it doesn't take into account that we live in a fallen world, that our nature is fallen, that our nature is wounded. It doesn't take into account the consequences of original sin, meaning my intellect is darkened, I don't see the truth as I ought, and my will is constrained, I don't do the good as I should. I would reject that argument personally, because if there's any institution, and optimism is not a theological word, it's a more secular natural virtue type of word. The word that we would use is the phrasing of the document itself. Joy and hope. Joy and hope. The document spends a lot of time speaking of the church and humanity. That's the very first part of the document. And then getting into all types of other challenges and issues like marriage and the family, culture, economic and social life, political community, peace and international community, and getting its sleeves rolled up and becoming involved. This document is not the last word when it comes to the church's engagement with the modern world, but at least establishes principles like you have no, You have no option as a Christian but get involved in the modern world. You have no option as a Christian but engage with the modern world. You have no option as a Christian to bring what you believe to the world that is around you. Last Tuesday, we all made it through the national elections. And as I promised everybody, Wednesday came and Thursday followed and so did Friday. And here we are again together on a Sunday. People often say to me after elections, privately and publicly, well, are you worried about the whole situation? I mean, where are we in relation to this? Parishioners come up to me during the week, and some of them are doing a dance like a little leprechaun from Ireland. They're so happy with the results. Other parishioners come up to me, and they're dressed in black from head to foot like Queen Victoria, saying, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness." And that always strikes me because you have two people who are very committed Catholics, many people, all of them, very committed Catholics, educated people, reasonable people, and look how they see things so radically differently. Now, I know at times we could tear our hair out, but it is what it is. It is what it is. Are we to lose hope? Well, no, we are the hope. In 2 years' time, there's another slate of elections for the House, if I'm right in saying that. In a democracy, everything is built into the system as a corrective. So we still have a role to play. We still have a role to play. So please pray for all the candidates and for all those who've been elected. It's important. I know it may stick in someone's craw to pray for a particular person who is president. I mean, I had Catholics say to me years ago, "Oh, I can't pray for President Obama." And I said, "Shame on you. You can pray for President Obama." The scripture is very clear. Pray for the emperor, Paul says. What? Pray for the emperor? Who thinks he's God? Who worships pagan gods? Who has enslaved us and occupied our territory? Pray for the emperor? Well, why would Paul say that? Because the emperor had all the power on the face of the earth. If you want anybody to grow in wisdom and prudence, it needs to be the emperor. So too with anyone who holds public office. Anyone who holds public office. And the document talks about our engagement in the political order and in the moral order. But if you think back through history, the most unlikely people God worked through, when the world thought they were a complete mess one way or another, the Lord's will was done through them. A very good example of that would be, remember the house of Israel went into slavery to Babylon, 70 years of captivity. King Nebuchadnezzar took the house of Israel lock, stock, and barrel, deposited them in Babylon, and held them there. 70 years later, after all of the prayers of Israel, Cyrus, a pagan king who did not know God or the things of God, rises up early in the morning, asks a scribe to come forward, dictates an edict that says, the house of Israel is set free immediately, if not sooner. Immediately. Wow. That can be said of anyone who holds public office, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent, whatever. We have to pray that they would be open to wisdom and prudence. What's the other option? That we cut them loose and think, well, to heck with you. Well, that can't be an option either. It doesn't mean that that we're always delirious about praying for certain individuals, but they desperately need prayer. How are things going to get better? Only with prayer, only with the grace and power of the Lord. So the document, as you know, is the longest, divided into two parts, unlike any other document of the Council. Begins with the church and humanity, fundamental principles on human dignity, community, and social justice. And then it gets into all specific issues: marriage, family, culture, economics, political life, and peace. Think of the church's social teaching, which I think is very lost even within the church at times. The church's social doctrine. Remember when Cain killed Abel? I'm right, is it? I always get that confused. Cain killed Abel, the first instance of fratricide in the Old Testament scriptures. Remember, God comes looking Cain in the garden. Cain runs away just like our first parents did when they fell from grace. They hid themselves from God. They felt shame. They realized their nakedness before God. God goes looking, Cain, 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 where are you? Does God know where Cain is? Well, of course he does. He's inviting Cain to respond to the question, Cain, where are you? Cain then comes forward, and the Lord, the story tells us, said to Cain, and where might your brother Abel be? Wow. And then remember his response, basically. Am I my brother's keeper? How does the Lord respond to that in the New Testament? By God, you are your brother's keeper. By God, you are your sister's keeper. By God, your neighbor is your concern. Remember in the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke's gospel, the only gospel that gives us this parable. Remember the scribe, in order to test Jesus again, little smart aleck scribe, says to the Lord, all this talk, basically I'm paraphrasing, all this talk about love your neighbor, Lord, and who exactly is my neighbor so that I may love them? Remember what was the understanding at the time? Only a co-religionist was your neighbor. My responsibility was to love my neighbor. Who was my neighbor as a good Jew? Another Jew. Was the Gentile my neighbor? No. Could I choose to love them? Well, yes. Had I an obligation to love them? Well, no. Imagine. See how narrow that was? That only those within the household of faith constituted neighbor for me. What does the Lord say through the Good Samaritan? Basically, everyone is your neighbor. Why is that? The very first principle of Catholic social teaching, there are 4 principles. The very first principle is dignity, is the very first principle. What is social justice? What is our social teaching? How we engage with the moral order, the social order, the cultural order, the political order, the human order. How we engage with the world that is around us, all the social issues of our day. Remember when we were reading John chapter 6 throughout the summer, I tried to emphasize, think of AA. It's a great fellowship, but think of AA, those 2 letters. Our response to God must always be 2 things. Number 1, adoration, and number 2, action. So the Catholic who sits in the chapel all day staring at our blessed Lord in the tabernacle, that's adoration. And then they go home with very little to no concern for the poor, and they consider social justice issues to be an enemy of religion, to be a left-wing conspiracy. They call it Marxism, socialism. Oh my God. All they see is the Lord. Am I my brother's keeper? By God, you are your brother's keeper, both your brother and your sister. Or the person who is never out of Catholic action day and night, wiping down mattresses and helping the homeless. Is that a good thing? That's a fantastic thing. But they can't make it to Mass on Sunday, or they don't pray any prayers. There's an imbalance there. You know, sometimes people can be so heavenly, they're no earthly use. And they can be so earthly, they're no heavenly use. Does that make sense? Like, we've all met people who are very holy, but as odd as a brush. Just odd. I've met people who are very oriented only to neighbor, and they can be a little odd because things are out of balance. So the document talks about balance. Get into the world and make a difference. Get into the world and make a difference. Dignity. Every human person is created in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, I have, in a sense, to be truly Christian, I have no freedom to decide who my neighbor is. The person of color, the person of a different religion, different politic, different culture, different ethnicity. The communist during the Cold War is my neighbor. The Russians are my neighbor. The Ukrainians are my neighbor. The Muslim nations are my neighbor. Why? Because they're all created in the image and likeness of God. Everybody. The divorced and remarried person, the homosexual person, the abortion doctor, everybody is my neighbor. The document immediately begins to say that. How we relate to each other is because we're made in the image and likeness of God. The very first principle of social teaching. Why would I bother wanting to help my neighbor? Oh, because your neighbor, like you, has been created in the image and likeness of God. A spark of the divine life has been placed within them. They, like you, another human person, are a body and soul composite. They, like you, have been called into intimacy, communion, and friendship with God. They, like you, have a forever dignity. How dare you say your neighbor is not your concern? Wow. Is that very difficult? Yes, it's very difficult because my default position is selfishness, me, myself, and I. Do I really want to put myself out? Do I really need to be doing that all the time? And so on and so forth. So the first principle is dignity. All are created in the image and likeness of God. The second principle is the common good, meaning it's not all about me and what I can get or what my interests are. It's about the common good. What's going to help my neighbor, not just as an individual, but as a body. The third is subsidiarity. Let's do on the local level what can be done on the local level. That's very important. You all know the phrase, politics is local. It was always true. The church is local. Rome is very far away. Here we are in Lexington. We have to do what we can locally, like our Build group here in the parish, an interfaith group that engages with the moral, the social, and the political order. And sometimes a parishioner might say to me, well, why are we involved in a Build group? I mean, is that a Catholic group, Father? I said, well, it's not even the virtuous question. I mean, it's not Gaudium et Spes question. This is a group that seeks, it's an interfaith group, seeks for moral, social, and political reform. Absolutely. So can a Catholic be involved in that? Absolutely. Who is my neighbor? Everybody is neighbor. Now, does that mean we all believe the same thing about God and the things of God? No. But we can leave that for theology and theological discussion with each other. But the project is roll up your sleeves and transform that is around you. So subsidiarity. Let's work with the local council. Let's work with the mayor. Let's get things done. And the fourth principle is solidarity. That I don't stand over my neighbor. I stand under my neighbor, hence the word understanding. I don't overstand. I understand. I stand in solidarity with my neighbor. Dignity, the common good, subsidiarity, solidarity. Now, I know you say that to some people, they become apoplectic, saying, oh my God, is that not what Hitler said? Is that not a form of fascism? Is that not radical social nationalism? You know. Sometimes people can become very blinded by their own politic. Gaudium et Spes calls us to actually have eyes to see and ears to hear, so that when we get involved in our politic, which we must do, we bring to that politic things that by their nature are perennial and eternal principles. So the church and the humanity, everyone created in the image and likeness of God. Community and social responsibility, you are your brother's keeper. Do I have responsibility only for Catholics? You are your brother's keeper. But I'm not that sure of these other people from other Christian groups. You are your brother's keeper. But is that person not a Muslim? You are your brother's keeper. Absolutely. Remember Mother Teresa? You know, one of the things she was criticized for, actually, when her cause went to Rome for canonization, she was criticized by some. Why did Mother Teresa not make all of these dying people Christian? Why did she not baptize them? Why did she minister to a Muslim and allow the Muslim to die as a Muslim? Mother Teresa wasn't interested in coercion or force or fear or pressure. She wasn't interested in proselytizing. It is true that many of those to whom she ministered did come to Christianity because they saw it in her. They saw dignity, they saw common good, they saw subsidiarity, they saw solidarity, they saw Christ in them. One has no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. You are my friends if you do what I command you. So it's no surprise for us to engage in the social order. Please try and dissuade people or disavow them of the erroneous understanding that somehow social justice belongs to those who bear the label liberal. Now you can see this in the party divides in the United States. You can see one party leans one particular direction, another party leads another particular direction. The church says to us, put both of those directions together and you get the teaching of Christ. I mean it's you are your brother's keeper from conception to natural death. You are your brother's keeper, and sister's keeper, not just in the womb, but outside of the womb. You are your sister's keeper at all stages of their life until the very end. You are your sister's keeper when it comes to welfare, when it comes to being supported, when it comes to not being abandoned by the state. You know, a very interesting thing that I grew up with, and it never was a contradiction to me, that the state has responsibility for the citizen. Some people use the term nanny state, which I think is very pejorative. The welfare system that I grew up with was not a nanny state. It was a recognition, especially when it was established, that some people simply couldn't do for themselves, that some people simply couldn't earn for themselves, that some people were simply too sick for themselves, and that we, the citizens, by way of our taxes, had to be able to help those people. How are they going to get a house unless rental allowance is given? You know, in Ireland, when the temperature drops below a certain degree during the winter, people who are on certain benefits all get free electric, free coal, and free gas. When you turn a certain age, public transport is free. You know, my father sails around all of Ireland now. He has a little pass, and he's on the train constantly going here and going there, going everywhere. He's on the bus. He has a car, and he has a little motorbike thing that he could sell. But I said, where were you today? Oh, I was in Dublin today. I said, how were you in Dublin today? He said, oh, sure, I have the train pass, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, there can be prudential judgment concerning the policies enacted by way of welfare. People can disagree over different elements of it. But the church says you are your sister's keeper, you are your brother's keeper, and the government has responsibility for the citizens. Do they not? Well, they do. They do. Okay, just moving quickly on. So, also understanding the modern world in terms of the science that is offered, the technology that is offered, and then a recognition of the different threats of the modern world, like rampant secularization, materialism, alienation. We see that in these days, do we not? You know, somebody could be on Facebook and say, oh, I've 1,800 friends. But they're the first person to admit, I'm so desperately lonely. I'm so desperately lonely. You know, the internet is a great gift, but it can also be a great curse for many people. Or they spend them, I actually got off, I'm on Instagram just to see what our campus ministry posts and stay up to date with things. But to begin with, you could spend an hour in your office going through all the Instagram videos. Oh, there's a little cat jumping up on a table. Oh my goodness, there's a little dog rolling over to have its stomach petted. Oh, that's great, that's great. Oh, there's the humane shelter and someone's in getting it. Oh, that dog is so lovely, 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 lovely. And then you get all the sad stories and dear children who have cancer and husbands who have cancer, and you could spend hours. And then people get a complex about Facebook. Some of our young people will, well, why did this person unlike me? Why have they not liked me? I sent them a friend request. I haven't heard back from them. What does that say about me? So the Second Vatican Council, there was no internet. When was the internet? In the 90s? I think. Do you remember the phone going, the phone, you'd plug it in, AOL, way back in the mid-90s? You couldn't use any phone in the house because you had your internet plugged into the wall. And then I thought to myself with the email, gee, there's no way I'm going to send someone an email. Why would I not just call them or write them a letter? Wow, we live by email now. Then when you got texts on your phone, when we had cell phones, remember we started off with phones that you could take it off the wall, pull up the aerial, and you'd walk outside to the back garden, and you'd guess where I'm talking to you from. I'm in the back garden. Oh, how does that happen? Is there no wire on the phone? Oh, no, it's got an aerial now. And you were walking all around the house out onto the road. Hello, 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 how far? Hello, hello, hello. Look at the technological advances that have been made. And it contains great value. It contains great gift. The document says that we should embrace all that's moral, all that's licit to engage with our society, the society that is around us. Also, the role of the church to propose what she believes about the moral order, the social order, the political order. You know, people want the church to announce her opinion. It doesn't mean they agree with her, but we have something to say, and we are a large, large voice in the marketplace and an important voice in the marketplace. And then the church gets into all of the other specific issues in part 2, like marriage and family. How does the church understand marriage? Obviously, that's very debated in many areas of the world today, but one man, one woman, lifelong, life-giving. But where does that leave others who think marriage is something different? Where does that leave others who believe that what they have, which is not this, is a true marriage? Is love love in all circumstances? What do we do with individuals who are not able or not willing or not capable to respond to this teaching of the church? What about divorce? What about remarriage? What constitutes the family itself? Is the family all of this? Is the family whatever I say it is? Or is there some type of constitutive principles whereby this reality is truly family? Now, in 1962, the world had a very different landscape, didn't it? I mean, the sexual revolution was about to take place. Upheaval throughout the world was about to take place. Riots on university campuses was about to take place. And at the same time, the church, one of the most stable institutions in the world that everybody could look at, and it was predictable. I mean, when you were 6 years of age, the nun dressed the same as when you were 90 years of age. When you were 6 years of age, the priest dressed the same. And when you were 90 years of age, he was still dressed the same. You heard that one about the religious sister after the reforms of the council when they said, you know, you can shorten your habit a little. You can take the veil off. So Sister Kieran was one of the religious sisters, and she came into the parish priest one day, and she had the habit adjusted, and she had the veil off her head. And she said to the Monsignor, "Oh, Monsignor, you didn't know that I had beautiful blonde hair." And he said, "No, sister, and I didn't know you had varicose veins either." Things were very stable. I mean, we kind of went through life, la, 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 nothing changes. You came to Mass the same week, and had anything changed from the week before? No. No. I mean, that was it. And then the reform started, and some people thought, oh my God, the world has ended. How can we pray in English at Mass? Oh my God, the Masons have taken over the church. There's been a left-wing ideology take hold of Rome. What's all this about? Oh, so we've the option of not eating meat on a Friday. Oh my God, the nuns used to tell me that was a mortal sin. So something that was a mortal sin yesterday is now not a mortal sin today. Oh my Lord, what's happening? It was never a mortal sin to eat meat on Friday. Now, what we may have said to young children to encourage them to be faithful to a discipline of the church might have been very unhelpful. It can't be a mortal sin to eat meat on a Friday when the church says, abstain from meat. It doesn't constitute grave matter. It's not connected to any of the 10 Commandments. There are things more grave in the life of the church than whether you eat meat on a Friday or not. Now, the individual who goes out on a Friday during Lent and says to themselves, to heck with the church, they're not telling me, I'm going to have a big steak for my dinner. Well, they're guilty of disobedience. It may not rise to the level of grave sin, but they're thumbing their nose at the church. The person who's halfway through a burger, like I've been many times, and suddenly realizes, oh, it's Friday. As little children, you'd pull the burger out of your mouth, and Mommy, what are we going to do with the burger? My mother would say, eat the darn burger. You've started. Don't waste the food. We'll be a bit more mindful next Friday. And my mother was a great theologian in her own very simple way, but then she would say, okay, so you ended up, we all ate meat today. I forgot about that. It was all I had in the freezer. You know, why don't we'll pray a decade of the rosary today together. We'll offer that as a gift to God. Sensible. Reasonable. You know, sometimes the church, I've told you this before, the church is the church triumphant in heaven, the church suffering in purification, the church militant on earth, and then also there's a fourth category of church, the church bonkers. Nobody does great like the church, and nobody does bonkers like the church. Because we get obsessed with things that don't really matter at times, don't we? I grew up beside a convent, and when the nuns, they all lived together, of course, in the convent, and if you broke a dish that belonged to the nuns, you had to carry that broken dish in your hands into evening prayer, and you had to kneel in the middle of the chapel while they were praying evening prayer, holding the broken dish in your hand as a penance. Church bonkers in some ways. Now, what was the church trying to communicate to that sister? Sister, everything that we have is in common. We live the life of poverty. You have to be careful with all the bits and pieces of it because we don't have much. Now, that was the reason, but then it just became bonkers. People didn't even know what the reason was. You know, we had Sister Bonaventure. I've told you this before, I think. All of the sisters with us as children were lovely, 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 strong, determined, well-educated women. We were very, very privileged. One of them was called, on the opposite end, was called Sister Bonaventure. And she had a face on her like a bulldog chewing thistles. Like a bulldog chewing thistles. And my mother would say to us, not very charitably, she said, you know, Sister Bonaventure, you know the very first thing she does when she gets up in the morning? No, Mummy. She smiles just to get it over with for the day. Just to get it over with for the day. So part 2, marriage and family culture. We're not to be afraid of cultures. We're to engage cultures. The whole document is about engagement, quite simply. It's not saying the church has nothing to say, or that the church should backpedal, or that the church should compromise, or that the church should dilute what she believes to be true, but that the church must engage in a way that's going to be useful and valuable. Useful and valuable. Talking to people who believe the opposite from the church. Working with people who believe the opposite from the church. Why? Dignity, created in the image and likeness of God. And newsflash, might the church actually learn from those who believe the opposite? Well, it's possible to learn from everybody. People have very interesting perspectives. They bring very interesting gifts to the table. Economic and social life. You know, the whole, to be careful of excesses of capitalism, for instance. To be careful of the excesses of a lot of the isms that exist in our society. To try and have balance. Notice what has happened sometimes in the United States. People rightfully talk about the separation between church and state, which I support. I think it's very sensible, it's very reasonable. Because throughout church history, when the altar and the throne were too closely aligned, it never worked out for us. When the altar and the throne were too closely aligned, it never worked out for us. It meant either that the state had become holy because they were being transformed by the teaching of the church, therefore they were clinging to her. It rarely meant that. Or it meant that the church herself was compromising falling in love with her own celebrity, with her own power, with her own privilege, wanting to stay close to the throne. It's never a good idea. And so we have to get into the world and make a difference. And the church does have proposals concerning the moral order and the social order, what she believes about the different bits and pieces of life, and the people making money off the backs of the hardship of others, the people making more money than they could possibly ever spend, the people making more money and denying it to those who need it most, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. The church is very, very interested in that. The church is interested in politics. I've said it many times. I think one of the sad realities of every election cycle we have in the United States is to hear certain bishops, certain priests, and people on YouTube being so partisan that it would just turn your stomach. From the pulpit. You can't vote for Republicans or you'll be excommunicated. How could you do that? Because they don't, I'm quoting other people, they don't care for your neighbor really. Or then in the next parish, don't vote for the Democrats because they don't care for their neighbor at all. Wow. I think that's, people who do that should be sanctioned by the church. It's not their role to be partisan. They're free to be partisan when they go to cast their vote. But when you're standing up here as a priest, you're not free to be partisan. You are free to be political. The gospel has political implications. Feed the poor, clothe the naked, house the homeless has political implications. I can ask why the poor are poor. I can ask what we're doing for people in this area. Absolutely. Absolutely. But when the church then starts to put up Harris or Trump banners on the front lawn of the bishop's office, not here, but in some places, that's a major problem. That's a major problem. Is that not a major problem? Absolutely, it's a major problem. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned the assassination attempt on former President Trump, and I mentioned the gracious phone call of Biden to Trump fairly soon after. And I hadn't even got the word Trump out of my mouth when a member of the congregation jumped up and stormed out the door. They went into the narthex, thankfully, where the Knights of Columbus were gathering, and the person said to the Knights, "Oh, he's talking about Trump and politics again. I hate that." The Knight said, "But why don't you take a seat? Because I've heard what he says at all the other masses. Just take a seat and listen to the complete sentence." They sat down, listened to the complete sentence, and came back into the church and sat down. But that's how incendiary it all is now, no? You only have to mention Biden, and I can see people in the congregation wilt. Or Trump, people in the congregation wilt. Yeah, people lean different ways. But I also ask that people wait for complete sentences. for complete sentences. So the political order has to be engaged with. The church has to get involved with politics. We have to vote. The church, in relation to international communities and others, work with others, engage with others, work with others, engage with others. The role of the laity is very important in this document. Church reminds us it's not primarily the role of the clergy and the religious to get out into the world, into the market square. We are in the market square, but it's the role of the lay faithful to roll up their sleeves and get involved in the market square, to lobby, to petition, to get involved. This document has great joy in it. It has great hope in it. It has great optimism in it. But you could summarize the whole document in one phrase: roll up your sleeves and engage. Roll up your sleeves and engage. Very important. Any observations? Any comments? Now, we do have time for people to offer what was their sense of the document? What did you find most engaging about it, most refreshing about it? Yes. 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 Oh, well, sure. So our American bishops have every time an election comes close, they issue the document, Faithful Citizenship. And in that document, the bishops, as teachers of the faith in the United States, they come together and they allow us to understand the issues rather than the party politics, but to understand the issues. Not every issue has the same weight, not every issue demands the same response, and the issues are many and they are varied. Help us with that, to inform us of that. Why? Because we are to engage the world. I met people in the parish who said to me, "Oh, I don't intend to vote. Why would I vote?" Another person said, "I haven't voted in 30 years. I never vote." It's not the mind of Gaudium et Spes. I mean, you're not engaging. I'm sure you do it as well, but you know how I handle a person who has never voted? If they begin to talk about the politic and wring their hands, I simply say to them, "Did you vote?" "No." You don't have much to say to me, in a sense, because you didn't bother to roll up your sleeves and to get involved. I'm very militant when it comes to that, because of growing up in Northern Ireland, not having the vote for a period of time. It's very important. So yes, our bishops guide us in how to engage the moral, social, and political order. Sure. Again, with many documents, people were all a bit allergic to documents at times. But they are worth the read. They are worth the read. Any other comments on Gaudium et Spes? Margie?
How would you describe the ideal parish level of engagement? I mean, I could say, what would you like to see us?
Oh, sure.
But I
Yeah.
want to make it more general.
Yeah, I mean, I really think the Gaudium et Spes is not fully realized throughout the church. And I think that some of our parishes have basically become places of adoration and worship, not places coupled with action. Some parishes are all about action, and you wouldn't find a tabernacle if you looked in every corner of the building. So it's trying to get that action and adoration together. I think in this parish, we could all be doing much more as individuals and as a parish body by way of outreach, for instance. Recently, I formed an outreach service committee. So one of our staff members, she's charged with meeting with those who need help. You can go to our website, it'll say social services. It's advertised in the narthex. It's in the bulletin. People call us from all around Lexington looking help. And that goes to Kathy Russell. Kathy is also trained to understand what the local churches offer, what the civic authorities offer, and she's charged with finding a niche. What is a particular need in this area that is currently not being met, and that we're trying to discern what that is so we can meet that. So each month we help with about $4,000 to $5,000 in outreach. But it's not just simply up to a staff department to take care of outreach. Now, you all take care of outreach in your own way. Wherever you are, the work of the parish takes place. Wherever you are, outreach is taking place. But I really do think that we could be a lot more intense about our parochial outreach, not just as individuals. My parents, their first bed and their first couch came from St. Vincent de Paul. They had no money whatsoever. My mother had been burnt out of her home about 6 months before she married. They came, anti-Catholic people came into the neighborhood. They were armed, they were shooting at people. They poured gasoline into people's letterboxes. My mother and her 6 sisters and her mother and father had to get up over the back wall of their house to escape. They burnt rows and rows of houses. So they didn't have anything. So she went to St. Vincent de Paul. She got a couch and a bed. My parents were the biggest supporters of St. Vincent de Paul their entire life. It was the only collection permitted after every Mass on all church property in Ireland was the St. Vincent de Paul collection. They collected in a red box that was shaped like a church. Everybody in Ireland knew what poverty was. Absolutely. And people would give to that. So to found a St. Vincent de Paul Society, for instance, where you're focusing on adoration, prayer, spirituality, of charity, and then you're actually getting involved in the work of charity. There's much, much more can be done. I can't do it all. None of us can do it all. That's why we need people to step forward and help us. Any other comments or observations? Huh? Sure.
What other resources may we use to learn about Catholic social?
There is a compendium. So there is the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, and it basically gathers together a lot of the current documents on social teaching. Very few people have heard of that. I taught the compendium when I was in Danville. So on Tuesday nights in Danville, the first year for the adult faith formation, we had 180 parishioners would come into the church, and we went through the entire adult catechism for 9 months. That's all online if you ever want to watch it. Just Peter and Paul Danville, Catechism of the Catholic Church. Then we did a series on the social teaching of the church. No one had heard of the compendium. I think it's called the Compendium of Church's Social Teaching. And it, right from Leo XIII, saying that property belongs to God, all of us simply rent property. Let me end with one story. I knew a lady in Texas. She was part of the original oil family. The largest oil field in the world is located in northeast Texas. The parish there, Christ the King, for the longest time didn't even take up a collection. They didn't need to. Because the entire mile, I think every couple of inches was $1 million for the oil as you went along the main street and the thing's pumping up and down, up and down. I think I've lost my point. That happens. What was it? Oh, yes. So anyway, so she was dying, and I would go to her house. Dorothy Manzel was her name, and pray with her and help her. She had staff. She had a $13,000 square foot home. She used to say to me about the home, "Oh, Father, it's not home, but it is much." It's not much, but it's home. She would reverse that. It's not home, but it's much. She was involved in St. Vincent de Paul, homeless shelters, everything her entire life. As she got close to die, she said to me, "Father, look around you. See everything that's here? Very soon it's going to be someone else's." And that's, Leo XIII really said that in Rerum Novarum. He said that everything we have here is ours only for a particular period of time. It all passes to someone else, so do the very best with it that you can. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm very pleased. Thank you. Thank you. We have a session next week when I'm gone to Florida for 7 days. But the session is on ecumenism. So the document on ecumenism. That's next week. Very interesting. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you very much.